Alright, geezers. This is going to be my third attempt at recording the third part of the prologue of The Monsters We Became or Fell For, which, if you're here, then I imagine you know what the fuck I'm talking about. The reason I'm dressed like this is, again, visual reference. I've taken my glasses off. I think because there's two characters, we'll go David has glasses, he has his costume, Tony doesn't, and he has his. That's kind of, breaks up. But I've done a couple of readings of this, and as you know, I'm doing this for kind of practice and working things out. Also for like confidence building and all that. And to keep myself out of trouble. But I seem to kind of rush through it the same way, like if I'm, whenever I give presentations or, if I'm, just doing what I'm doing now and talking to people. Rush through it, get it over and done with quickly. So, I found that when I was reading slowly, it just sounded horrible. I mean, I'm over my cold. I finished the course of antibiotics. I should be alright. Oh, but I've been... And that's the thing, you've got to think about what you're going to do with the voices. They're brothers, but you've got to... Do you have to differentiate between them? I don't know. Well, let's just go for another take. If this works, then it works. The Monsters We Became or Fell For, Prologue, Part 3, Anthony. I don't know how else to say this, but no matter how many times we go over it, you're never going to get a different version of the truth out of me. And the more I repeat myself, the more I sound like a preacher. What possible reason could I have to deceive you anyway? Shall we begin then, as always? Well, I do fucking declare that not only were you flat out wrong about being able to read David like a book, but any times you weren't can be chalked up to blind luck due to the sheer number of assertions pulled straight out your arse. Protest all you want, but has it ever done you any good? You can justify your delusions until you're blue in the face, but that doesn't magically stop them being delusions. You see, the thing I found with my brother is that the key to understanding where he's coming from is much the same as with anyone else. Conversation wins out over divination, you fucking retard. To put it another way, if you actually could peer under people's skin and see them as they truly are, then I'd have been up shit creek long before my 12th birthday. You couldn't though, so I wasn't. However, there did turn out to be someone right under your nose who believed the rules didn't apply to you. Who didn't believe... Fucking... bastards. You couldn't know, so I wasn't. However, there did turn out to be someone right under your nose who believed the rules didn't apply to him. But alas, it wasn't my brother. Shall I give you a clue? Or would you like to try and guess it by yourself? Yeah, that's right, Dad. You don't need a big head to be a big head. I mean, how could I respect any authority I couldn't even recognise? I've gotten away with being a foolhardy little shit for so long, by then I've confused cunning with intellect. Seeing rules and restrictions as boundaries to protect the weak from the ignorant or the ignorant from themselves, but of no real concern to me. The commandments were more of the same, and I am forever in debt to those demented Catholic pederasts who educated my faith out of me. Am I rushing this? Don't know. If I believed in anything at that point, then it was family. But like any deity, it couldn't be meaningful without being divisive. Forgive me if I'm getting melodramatic here, but tell me how you suppose it affects a child's development, having a father who spoils them rotten, but physically and verbally abuses their mother and brother. What could you call being impotent before the continual suffering of loved ones? Still no idea? Well, I call it a fucking curse. I mean, don't you even consider the fool bred might side with the underdog, or was that your unassailable sense of entitlement clouding your judgment again? Personally, I'd have thought an experience like the one which led to your discharge from the RAF would have been enough to teach anyone humility, but clearly not. This may be throwing petrol on the fire, but here's the thing, and stop me if you feel I've misunderstood anything whatsoever. Well, not unusual to write your men damning reports. It was unusual for you to be ambushed and violently assaulted as a result. Even more unusual was for the assailants to take a minute out of kicking the living shit out of a commanding officer to fetch a length of rebar each to better work him over with. Regaining consciousness in hospital to find yourself with a broken neck, then learning that nerve damage would leave you permanently disabled, can't have been easy. However, if that had been me requiring assistance to piss blood into a bedpan, then I'd have taken some time out from staring up at the ceiling to ask myself just how much of an absolute fucking cunt I must be for trained, disciplined men to have come so close to beating my bitch ass to death. Anyone who finds himself in such a predicament and doesn't chew on the possibility they're not nearly as wise, decent or infallible as they thought shouldn't act too surprised when they rush headlong into the next predicament. Being a victim doesn't mean you have to behave like one, but I suppose seeing the world in black and white made it easier maintaining that ego of yours. How could you be accountable when they were in the wrong? If it wasn't your fault, then neither was anything you did to instigate it, right? I bet you tied yourself up in knots with all that rationalising. Someone should have told you that it's better to be feared than loved, but only if you're not hated. Perhaps then you'd have stopped to consider why your subordinates had no respect for you instead of just carrying on, business as usual, demanding it unconditionally from David. Inspiration and support is what earns respect, not the begrudged provision of food and shelter, not the cruel bullying of the pompous tyrant. Seriously now, come on. I really shouldn't have to explain this shit to you. I mean, for the longest time, it was impossible for me to think of the vindication your near murder granted David without considering unburdening on him about the day I took over where they'd left off. In the end, though, it just wouldn't have been right, because whether he condoned my actions or not, such an awful confession would ultimately only twist him further, and I simply couldn't risk my brother not high-fiving me. So, I kept my stupid mouth shut, and whenever I thought about your death, I reassured myself that David would see it as I did, not as a murder, but as a mercy killing. Your beloved Spock was right. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. You must realise that you sowed the seed of your own demise the day you realised I needed to know about the 9mm pistol hidden away in your bureau. All secretive and smiley you were, like a kid with a new toy in the first day back at school after Christmas. And I'll tell you what, I've never removed a girl's panties with the degree of reverence you unwrapped that Browning from its scrap of grey cloth. Prior to that day, whether it was TA recruitment down Commercial Road or Navy days at the dockyard, if there'd been anything going on in town where children could be groomed for the military, then David and me were going. End of fucking discussion. Whenever one of those shows exposed us to deactivated firearms shackled together like chain gang petting zoos for the maladjusted, you trained me how to properly hold a pistol. But the day you presented me with a Browning, your eyes danced like I was a budgie hatching or a young girl working a Saturday job at Woolworths, and I knew we were done playing pretend. Don't forget to keep your finger off the trigger, Anthony, and only point at something if you wish to destroy it. I played it safe by taking aim at our wall with the neighbour you got on with the least. Van Damme or Seagal could have judged by the pistol's weight alone if it were loaded, but I had to ask my dad. Word to the wise, son, you'd said, grinning. When it comes to your weapon's condition and readiness, never take someone else's word for it. Get into the habit of treating every firearm as loaded and assume nothing. From that day on, and more often than not, if we were the only ones at home, then out came the pistol. It ended the same way every time. You'd wrap it back up in its cloth and ask, what are the two most important rules of all, Anthony? Don't breathe a word of this to anyone, especially David, and only point at something if I wish to destroy it. That's my boy. I never was able to work up the nerve to ask why or how the pistol came to be in your possession, but I knew that nothing which makes a man's eyes dance like that gets locked up unless he's frightened it will be taken away. If you could have, I bet you'd have given it pride of place in your display cabinet, alongside all that limited edition handmade toss and tat. I can just picture a Browning high-powered juxtaposing your ornamental cottages, Toby jugs and commemorative Star Trek plates. I dread to think how much you wasted over the years collecting tasteless shite, which came with signed certificates of authenticity. But your ashes hadn't even cooled before I was bagging it all up, adamant that the fucking lot was getting dropped off the very top of the Tricorn car park. David came up with an even better idea though, and having decided that Oxfam probably helped the most non-white foreigners, we took everything to the charity shop. It's what Dad would have wanted, I said to the old lady behind the counter when she thanked us. It is what he'd want, nodded Dave. The other thing I was glad to see the fucking back of was that hateful bureau of yours. Dark, solid wood with carved motifs, imitation green leather on the fold-down writing desk, and always locked. I broke into the bastard thing for the first time after some infraction of David's, too minor to even recall, had gotten our Sega Mega Drive confiscated. We'd been left home alone thanks to a garden centre's weekend sale requiring as much space as possible in the back of your car, and since those places were miserable purgatories at the best of times, this was news to our fucking ears. After watching you drive away, I went immediately to your bureau, took the paperclip from my back pocket and unfolded it. Other than seeing it work on handcuffs in the movies, I had no real clue what I was doing, so didn't really expect to succeed, but as it turned out, there wasn't much to it at all, the lock turning and popping after mere seconds of fiddling. Two's up on Sonic, Dave. We set up as normal in the living room, and while one played a level, the other kept an eye out the window. Dr. Robotnik was getting fucking trounced, but in hindsight, going past the 3-hour mark was just careless. We should have played it safe and packed it in after 2. We should have, but we didn't. David leapt up at the sight of your horrible blue Datsun, disconnecting the Mega Drive in a frenzy and pushing it into my hands. Since you always drove to the end of the cul-de-sac to turn round before parking, I knew I had only a minute, maybe 2 if we were lucky. But I didn't feel fear or panic running through to the dining room, no. I felt fucking livid, because there were no game saving those days, and we'd made it all the way to the Scrap Brain Zone Act 2 with 11 goddamn lives. Feeling equal parts fascinated and appalled by your bureau and its musty scent of old documents, I wrapped the cables around the Mega Drive near enough as I'd found them, then returned the console to the position I'd taken care to commit to memory before first taking it. Having quickly satisfied myself that nothing seemed amiss, I closed the lid and slid in the paperclip. Fiddling as I had done before became more like outright fumbling as the seconds ticked away, and it dawned on me that even if I got lucky with the paperclip, I couldn't be sure if I was pressing the lock down enough or too much. I hissed all the colourful language I knew then. Wait, I always fucked it up. Fuck it. I hissed all the colourful language I knew. Fuck, why can't I do that one? I hissed all the colourful language I knew then, which, let's be honest, isn't far off from what I know now. But I still felt no fear or panic. You never raised a hand to me, so why would I? The sickly dread creeping up my back was for David, because I knew damn well that he'd cop a good hiding for this. He called over from the doorway. What you doing? I was still trying to think of something witty to come back with when we heard the front door open. My eyes never left that fucking lock, willing it to turn and daring to imagine you walking in with Mum, arms laden with plants, to find us out whistling to the budgies and the bureau showing no signs of tampering whatsoever. I worked that paperclip, fiddling and wiggling it, like I really wanted to leave a lasting impression on the lock, but try as I might, could I replicate that little turn? Could I fuck? School that Monday wasn't the first time I got shit for giving David a black eye, and it wouldn't be the last either, would it, Dad? I'll get it. Children are short and it's harder to stoop after having your neck broken for being a cunt. But was it entirely necessary to pound him in the head every fucking single goddamn time? I had the headmaster himself on me that day. But I simply can't understand it, Anthony, he said, taking me to one side on my way to class and brazenly putting his hand on my arse like he'd already bought me dinner. You always seem to get on so well with one another. Shaking his head in dismay. The lecherous fuck gave my arse a dainty little squeeze, and off he went, impure thoughts misting his gaze. David and me would never again get that close to completing Sonic the Hedgehog. As for your bureau, if I couldn't lock it back up again afterwards, then Being able to get it open was of use only to Catholics needing an excuse to touch my pert young behind. I put it out of my mind until a year later when you first showed me the pistol, and with that a seed was sown. Another year went by, during which that seed grew into a decision and blossomed into a plan. I'd seen Lieutenant Colombo pick apart enough overwrought homicides to know that the less you have to juggle, the less there is to drop. Consider yourself lucky it was me and not my brother orchestrating your bloody demise. The dreamer who can't live with his indecisions has no business pointing a loaded weapon at anyone. Nah, leave that nasty business to the doer who can live with his deeds. Don't get me wrong, that's not to suggest I acted impulsively. On the contrary, killing you was the first mature decision I ever made. Malicious, deliberate and premeditated as any we watched together on Colombo. Summer came round and there had always been something off about the atmosphere in our house, but it turned from maddening to simply fucking unbearable. Mum and you barely said a word to each other from one week to the next, and you'd long since stopped sharing her bed, preferring instead to fall asleep in the reclining armchair you bought for the dining room. It wasn't hard to find you those days, since any time not spent tending to your birds was invariably spent in that chair exploring strange new worlds aboard the Starship Enterprise. You'd worked your way up to Star Trek The Next Generation by then, and though you hadn't taken to Picard at first, not seeing how some bold old Shakespearean puffer could ever fill the boots of Kirk, over the course of the first season you warmed to the new captain, the Enterprise D, and her crew. My one regret is that I never got to see you lose your shit over Deep Space Nine. I could just imagine it. What's this? A fucking nigger in the captain's chair? When the night came to make my move, you'd fallen asleep watching Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Head lolling forward, chin to chest, mouth open for snores and dribble, bird shit on your t-shirt, every inch the dapper gentleman to your very last. I felt barely a tinge of love for you, and resented you yours for me. The guilt and shame that brought on eclipsing any I felt for despising my own fucking father. Barefoot, I approached you silently, avoiding any creaking floorboards, and placed a roll of black dustbin bags on the table. I wore latex gloves stolen from the school biology lab so as not to leave fingerprints on the pistol or powder marks on my hand. It was just as well you were a heavy sleeper, because there wasn't a great deal I could have said with the drawstring hood of that see-through disposable raincoat scrunched over my face, except boo. And that wouldn't have explained why I had only Y-fronts on underneath. I was well aware that I looked goofy as fuck and not deadly in the slightest, but it wasn't like I'd been planning on frightening you to death. Creeping round behind you, I picked the lock to your bureau in seconds, same as the first time, and I felt tempted to see if I'd be able to lock it back up again, but we all know what fate befell the curious in or near our house. Care to hazard a guess how many cat photos you put in the newsagent's window with that slingshot over the years? I retrieved the Browning from the same nook in which I'd always seen you place it, and unwrapped it from that scrap of grey cloth. It felt foreign in my hands, cold and cruel and simple of purpose. I saw a tool where you saw an ornament, a symbol, an extension. But it was a hammer, and you were a nail. When the catch behind the trigger didn't release a magazine, I turned the pistol over in my hands, and sure enough the grip was empty. Checking between paperwork, I spotted the first brass of a neat stack glinting up at me, retrieved the magazine and inserted it into the grip. Pulling back on the slide, chambered around, then I held the muzzle up to your right temple. Heavy metal, a whisker from fragile flesh. I closed my eyes to imagine pulling that trigger and ending you, my old man, my daddy, my own damn father. The motherfucker whose seed created me, whose love shaped me, whose prejudices twisted me. Only point at something if you wish to destroy it. In my mind's eye, nothing happened. The trigger didn't move, couldn't move. I almost fell apart, like a tense action scene trying to trick us into believing that the day had finally come, which even Van Damme or Seagal wouldn't make it through. However, the only trick required to believe that The day had finally come which even you wouldn't make it through, was to open my eyes and flick a safety lever down. Spitting his last breath from the bridge of the critically damaged Starship Reliant, Khan summed it up better than I ever could. From hell's heart I stab at thee. Sometimes, when I dream, you wake up at this point, looking up at me in shock and confusion. Other times you beg me for mercy, and either we hug, weeping, or end up rolling around the floor, both clutching the pistol until it goes off between us. In those dreams there's always a few seconds where I'm dying to know which one of us just got that bullet, but it's never who you'd think. On our first drive-through, though, you slept right through to the end. The trigger wasn't as easy to pull as I'd imagined, but it was smooth, and it's not like I could miss from that distance. My arm jolted, but I was shocked more by the racket than the recoil, the gunshot ringing in my ears as the stench of gunpowder and gore took over. It was nothing like I'd expected. For a start, the movies never showed Van Damme or Seagal dashing to the kitchen sink to spit out pieces of fucking brain having stood too close and pulling the trigger. You used to say that blood was thicker than water, and I remember thinking that it must be murder getting out of upholstery. He's dead, Jim. Wrong accent. Never mind. Sorry, was that insensitive? What's the accent? I don't know what you saw of yourself. Fuck's sake. I don't know what you saw in the aftermath yourself, but it wasn't a pretty sight, I can tell you that. My old man had been reduced in one brutal instant to some awful mess, still warm from human consciousness. What wasn't already a stain on your chair had been sent on its merry way by a bullet, and most of what didn't cling to either my face or raincoat had splattered against your bureau. I wanted to smile at the poetry of that, but then I'd be the cunt scrubbing it down after the police had been called. Surely it should be the police had left. I stood as witness to that carnage, feeling neither sorrow at your passing nor anxiety for what might be done to me because of it. And the husk before me no longer conjured any memories of the man I remembered. There was something in my chest, close to a stifled sob, but it refused to come out and faded. My actions had been the expulsion of a dangerous, disruptive influence, and the only tragedy was that pity and revulsion were all that you deserved. I'm not particularly proud of myself, but when all's said and done, if I were ever thrown back in time, even knowing now how the second mortgage and all your debt fucked us over, then I honestly couldn't tell you I'd not just do the whole damn thing all over again. I'll admit to a period racked by concern that, rather than making a difference, my saviour complex had been little more than closing the barn door after the horse had bolted, but the conclusion I came to was that if defending my brother doomed my mother, then it was only by failing to act sooner. I don't presume to know Mum's reason for taking her own life, but it's hardly a stab in the fucking dark to suppose it was for much the same reason she took so long finding the courage to do so in the first place. I mean, you'd already taken everything else from her. There's something insincere about looking back with disgust on the narcissistic megalomaniac who committed the rotten acts of my childhood. Something I'd expect from a person who'd grown taller without actually growing up, but better this impertinent little motherfucker right here than your own crass, reactionary bigot. I blinked myself back to my senses, glancing across at the clock on the wall in mild panic as the face came into focus. Breathing easier when I saw that I hadn't lost more than a couple of minutes since you'd taken your own life. Considering how fast my heart was beating, I felt surprisingly in control. The situation was never going to be me covered in evidence with only moments until someone came barging through the door. I knew for a fact that David was down the seafront taking microdots with Jack, and while Mum was technically upstairs, she was prone to getting so knocked out when she drank on her meds that you could have shot yourself right there in bed next to her and got nothing more than a brief lull in her snoring. You've only yourself to blame that the only possible witness to your suicide was an estranged wife who was unable even to wake from a gunshot within the family home. Now, when presented with such a cut and dry case of suicide, I doubted the police would feel the need to check your hand for powder marks, but if I was going to dress the scene, then I should put some consideration into it at least. After all, it was never being too careful that condemned the murderers on Colombo. Placing the pistol in your limp right hand, I pressed your fingers into a grip and took aim as best I could at Spock's ultimate sacrifice. With my left index finger pushing down on your right index finger, we put a round together into Kirk's poignant farewell to his old friend. "Take that, Shatner, you fucking prick," I muttered. I fucking hate Star Trek. I reasoned that if you'd actually fired that second shot, your arm would have fallen with the weight of the pistol, which would then have fallen to the floor. Recreating that faithfully just seemed fucking careless to me and ran the risk of shooting myself accidentally. Instead, I made my best guess for where your arm would have ended up while lowering it to the ground, allowing the pistol to flop gently out of your hand and coming to rest on the carpet. From what I heard, the tired old pig that investigated that scene concluded that you probably couldn't bear to see one more Enterprise landing party lose another red shirt, and after shooting the telly, you spent a few minutes ruminating on which would give out first, your health or your marriage. Well, it's the last straw that breaks the camel's back, as they say, and turning the gun in yourself was apparently the final frustrated expressive act of a man at the end of his tether. Lieutenant Colombo would have called that out as the lamentable horseshit it clearly is, and waste no time uncovering the truth, but Lieutenant Colombo doesn't work for Hampshire Constabulary, so fuck you, Dad. Feeling satisfied that your body looked as I wanted it to be found, I took the roll of black dustbin bags from the table and tore one off. I unbuttoned my raincoat, then removed it carefully, rolling it up and dropping it into the bin bag along with my latex gloves. Taking care not to leave too much air inside, I tied a knot in the top of that first bin bag, then tore off a second, into which I dropped the first. That done, I took the bin bag and the roll with me upstairs to the bathroom, washed my face, neck and feet, then brushed my teeth till my gums bled. I tossed my toothbrush into the bin bag, then took off my Y fronts and tossed them in too. I tied a knot in the top, same as before, then went to my bedroom where I hid the evidence in the gap between the wardrobe and the wall, confident it would stay there undisturbed until I was able to dispose of it safely. I didn't need to check in on Mum, as I could hear her insistent snoring through the bedroom door, so I walked straight to my room and put on the pair of sky blue pyjamas she'd bought me months ago, but which I'd flat out refused to wear, because they made me look like a fucking simpleton. Her argument was that since no one was going to see me in them, it didn't matter what I looked like, and there's no denying the sterling parental logic in that. As it turned out, quite a few people would see me in them, which is precisely why I wore them, despite them being too short on the leg but too long on the arm. I needed the police to underestimate me when I told them how I'd gone downstairs to investigate a loud noise and found Daddy, but it wasn't Daddy. Yada yada. I stood in front of the mirror. The pyjamas were perfect, almost farcical. You had to hand it to Mum. She'd really outdone herself with those fucking things. It was like she knew somehow. I went downstairs, walked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks, the blood draining from my face because you weren't where I'd left you. As I walked closer, I saw what had happened. You just slid out of the chair and landed on the mass of your head, propped up by what was left of it, your arse stuck up in some gravity-defying, darkly comic posture. I have to be honest, it did make me grin something foolish. I listened out for sirens or commotion, but there was just the hiss and crackle of the murdered telly. It was reasonable to assume that if nobody had come running yet, then my next act would also fall on deaf ears. But I needed to get my shit together anyway, so fuck it. It'd give me a chance to get in character. Walking over to the phone and just before dialing 999, I took a deep breath, then let out my very best little girl scream. next time. Thank you for listening. Please buy my book. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all that crap. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye.